Well, Dragnet is in half an hour, but first of all, tonight's news at 10.
An exclusive look inside the dictator's secret nerve center.
I'll be reporting from deep inside one of Saddam's Baghdad bunkers.
Blair faces fierce Commons questioning over Iraqi weapons. First steps on a new road to Middle East peace. And celebrating culture on the banks of the Mersey.
The ITV News at 10 with Trevor MacDonald.
Good evening. ITV News has obtained evidence of the lengths to which former President Saddam Hussein went to protect himself and his family from attack in the war on Iraq. Our correspondent John Irvine is the first journalist to go inside a complex of palaces and bunkers where the dictator and his family had homes. The complex was targeted on the very first night of the war in what the Americans called an attempt to decapitate the regime. The palaces, badly damaged but not destroyed, are in southern Baghdad, near the banks of the Tigris. Here's John Irvine's exclusive report.
His and her palaces, 7 of them beside each other, one for each member of Saddam's family. 4 were hit by cruise missiles as the Americans tried to wipe out the ruling clan on the first day. No doubt it's the right place, it's only the timing that was slightly wrong. Believe it or not, this place isn't nearly as grand as some of Saddam's other palaces, but clearly he felt safe here, and this is where he was on the opening night of the war. Saddam is thought to have survived the attack. He may have escaped beforehand, or perhaps he took refuge in the network of bunkers that lie beneath the complex. There are tunnels and stairways leading deep underground. At the end of one passageway, we find an entrance to the hideaway. Heavy door. Well, this is it. There was a large network of rooms, some of them huge, mirroring the dimensions of the ground floor above. A lot of thought went into this. Obviously, this place is now in a fairly shoddy state, but there is still enough evidence, despite the burning and the looting, to suggest that this bunker was intended to be a home, a place where people were supposed to live, and in some style. Under another of the palaces, we find a bunker that was partially flooded. But again, this was a large construction with a warren of rooms. He must have felt safe in his bunkers. But even above ground, in a palace development like this, Saddam Hussein and his family were far removed from the Iraqi people and the real world. John Irvine, ITV News, Baghdad.
Here, the fallout from the war in Iraq put Tony Blair under intense pressure again today, this time in the Commons. He was bombarded with demands for an independent inquiry into claims that the government deliberately misled the public about the reasons for war. He refused. Let's go now to our political editor, Nick Robinson in Downing Street. Nick?
It's official, Trevor. Tony Blair is not a liar, so says at least the Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, on a day when the government was trying to silence its critics. Who will judge independently? Well, not an official inquiry, as you said. Instead, a small group of MPs meeting in secret and reporting directly to the Prime Minister himself.
Is this the guilty man? Did Alastair Campbell spin the country into a war that his boss had long ago made up his mind to fight? That's the grave charge that the Prime Minister today fought to knock down.
These claims are simply false.
One by one, he read out the accusations and declared himself innocent.
The claim about the readiness of Saddam to use weapons within 45 minutes of an order to use them was inserted into the dossier at the behest of Number 10. That is the claim that has been made. It is completely and totally untrue.
Only an independent inquiry can judge that, was the cry of the opposition.
Nobody believes a word now that the Prime Minister is saying. That's the truth. And now we have the unedifying sight of the Leader of the House being sent out to do his bidding and attack elements of the security services, which is disgraceful.
The temperature in the Commons had been turned up by the allegation that so-called rogue elements in the security services, presumably here at MI6 HQ, were undermining Tony Blair. But who needs rogue spooks when former ministers pop up to remind you of past intelligence errors?
I have never questioned the good faith of my right honourable friend. Could he not therefore save the Intelligence and Security Committee a lot of time with their inquiry by correcting the record now on the alleged uranium from Africa and on the alleged weapons ready in 45 minutes, and say that he regrets that in all good faith he then gave the House information which has since turned out to be wrong?
The answer to that was no, from a man who clearly believes these questions are only being asked by those who opposed war in the first place. So, having batted them away, the Prime Minister appeared outside number 10 to promote his favourite sport. His answers to the charge he'd lied, taken from the lips of the King of the Court. You cannot be serious.
The Prime Minister did his best today to silence the who said what to whom questions. He did enough in a confidence performance to persuade Labour MPs not to rebel in the Commons and force an official inquiry. But the central question, did he exaggerate the threat from Iraq in order to justify a war he was already set upon? That will only be answered, really, when, if, weapons of mass destruction are found in Iraq. Trevor.
Nick, thank you. At an historic summit in Jordan today, President Bush persuaded Israel and the Palestinians to take the first steps on a road to peace. Israel promised to begin removing some Jewish settlers from the West Bank. The Palestinians promised to call for an end to the armed struggle. But will it be a defining moment for the Middle East or another lost opportunity? James Mates reports.
The choreography is familiar. How many times have we seen it before? An American president flanked by Middle Eastern leaders to announce another peace initiative.
The journey we're taking is difficult. No leader of conscience can accept more months and years of humiliation, killing, and mourning. And these leaders of conscience have made their declarations today in the cause of peace.
As the three leaders met in the Jordanian sunshine this afternoon, Bush secured concessions and imposed obligations on both sides. In essence, he wants the Israelis to allow the Palestinians their own state in return for an end to attacks against Israel. The Palestinians made the right promises and got this in return.
It is in Israel's interest not to govern the Palestinians, but for the Palestinians to govern themselves.
That is a new commitment by Israel made after heavy American arm twisting. He followed up with a promise to start doing something about Israeli settlers moving onto occupied Palestinian land. Already, radical settlers are defying Israeli and international law and trying to build new outposts on the West Bank. This time, the army moved them on. After the promises made today, they will now have to move against much more established groups of settlers. Tonight in Jerusalem, several thousand marched to denounce today's agreement. They believe any concession to the Palestinians is a betrayal of Israel. These people voted for Ariel Sharon twice on the basis he was a hardliner who wouldn't do deals with the Palestinians. Now they feel betrayed. It is an irony that one of the biggest obstacles on the roadmap to peace may be the Israeli government's own natural supporters. James Mates, ITV News, Jerusalem.
The Australian Navy has rescued 2 British rowers stranded in the Indian Ocean after one of them got a serious bang on the head. They had been attempting to make the 5,000-mile crossing from Australia to Reunion Island when they hit a freak wave. The injured man, Mike Knowles-Smith, is now being treated on board an Australian warship. An expert witness has told the murder trial of Trupti Patel that there was no clear evidence that she'd suffocated her 3 babies. Professor Peter Fleming said there was evidence that the children had all died from an acute medical disorder. He said he knew of other families in which there had been 3 unexplained deaths of babies. From Reading Crown Court, Geraint Vincent reports.
Professor Peter Fleming says he's not someone who always believes the best in people, but he's convinced that Trupti Patel did not kill her children. Mrs. Patel is accused of smothering or squeezing her babies Amar, Jamie and Mia to death. Today she heard one of Britain's leading paediatricians tell her trial that they died of natural causes. Professor Fleming said he could find no convincing evidence that the deaths were caused by implied or imposed injury. He could find considerable evidence that points in the direction of a metabolic disorder, which is compatible with the picture that occurred in all three cases. The most likely explanation, he said, is that these children died as a consequence of a metabolic disorder. The court was told that the condition Mrs. Patel's baby suffered from was a very rare, inherited disease, the symptoms of which could be very difficult to spot. The prosecution challenged Professor Fleming's findings. If the Patel children had a metabolic disorder, he was asked, then why didn't it show up in any of the extensive tests done on Mia in the days after she was born? But Mr. Fleming was adamant. Such defects, he said, may only show themselves in an unexpected way later on. The case continues. Geraint Vincent, ITV News, Reading Crown Court.
There's more to come on News at 10 tonight, including why Liverpool's being made culture capital of Europe, and Hillary Clinton on her husband's relationship with Monica. All that when we come back.
Don't move! Hold on!
Follow your own road. Glenfiddich, the independent spirit.
Welcome back. The people of Liverpool have been celebrating the decision to make their city the European Capital of Culture in 2008. It was, according to the selection committee, the people who clinched it. Prestige and prosperity now beckon. How different from the bad old days of the Toxteth riots 2 decades ago. In a moment, a report on those changes by someone who was there. First, Nina Nana on the excitement of today's announcement.
After years of planning, the moment 6 cities had been waiting for.
The UK's nomination to be Capital of Culture in 2008 is Liverpool.
Sheer jubilation and not a little relief. The joy on Merseyside matched by the devastation, though, of the losing cities, particularly Newcastle and Gateshead, backed by Olympic triple jumper Jonathan Edwards.
The sort of view of Liverpool as a sort of basket case is over. Liverpool is now rightfully regaining its position as a world city.
The Culture Secretary visited the city herself this afternoon to join in the celebrations. Liverpool, as Capital of Culture, is now looking forward to what it hopes will be an extra £2 billion in investment, 2 million extra visitors and 14,000 new jobs from tourism and the cultural sectors.
It's a city of great art galleries, the Tate, the Walker. It's a wonderful city. Singers, musicians, poets. It is a great city of culture.
Well, the party will continue well into the early hours here in Liverpool. The city has 5 years before it adopts its prestigious new title. 5 years to plan for what it hopes will be a bright new multi-million-pound future. Nina Nana, ITV News in Liverpool.
20 years ago, it looked as though the roof was falling in on this once great maritime city. Liverpool making news for its social turmoil and political unrest. But it was the Toxteth riots 21 years ago that provided unforgettably bad images of Liverpool. Toxteth became an urban battleground, as I reported in 1981.
It's left parts of Liverpool looking as they can't have done since World War II.
It's hard to imagine walking through the quiet streets this afternoon, looking at some of this modern housing, that this was the scene of some of the worst urban rioting seen in these parts for over a century. In fact, just down the road from here, and the rioting raged up and down this street, bricks and petrol bombs falling like rain. Just down the bottom of the street a line of riot police were desperately trying to keep the riot in this area. 21 years on, there are new buildings and an air of optimism in Topsters.
I think it's a fantastic day for the city. What we've got the challenge for us all is to make sure that the potential that is there for the city is actually unlocked and it permeates down to the communities.
In Topstith and across this great city, they remember how Glasgow was transformed by Culture City status, and they're hoping the same will happen here. Ken Rees, ITV News, in Liverpool.
Coming up in a few minutes, what went through Hillary Clinton's mind when her husband, the president, told her he was having an affair with Monica Lewinsky? You can find out after the news from your part of the country.
Good evening. Army investigators have questioned Scottish troops over the deaths of 2 Iraqi prisoners of war. The men died while being guarded by soldiers from the Black Watch in Basra. It's understood there's no evidence that either prisoner had been mistreated, but Army officials say nothing can be ruled out until there's been a full investigation. Matt Bingham reports.
The Black Watch, part of the elite desert rats and at the sharp end of operations in the battle for Basra during the war. But now, 3.5 months after deploying to the Gulf, their role has changed from frontline combat soldiers to more of a police force, keeping civil order and guarding Iraqi prisoners of war. It's not clear exactly what has happened. 2 POWs died on separate days last month. The circumstances surrounding those deaths now under investigation. There have been speculative reports that one of them may have been roughed up, but military chiefs insist there's nothing at this stage of the inquiry to suggest any foul play, a view backed by one former Army major.
Any allegations of this type are serious and they have to be properly investigated, and I'm sure they will be by the Special Investigations Branch within the Ministry of Defence.
It's not the first incident involving alleged mistreatment of Iraqi prisoners. 2 soldiers from the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers have been sent back to their barracks in Germany after a man was punched and given a black eye. Another member of the regiment has been questioned over photographs which allegedly showed troops torturing Iraqi POWs. The inquiry into the Black Watch is at a very early stage. Top brass will be hoping when it's over, the regiment's long and distinguished history won't have a black mark against it.
A monk has been accused of giving a young boy an electric shock and forcing his brother to eat his own vomit at a List D school 40 years ago. Michael Murphy helped run St Ninian's residential school in Stirlingshire. He's now on trial along with 2 other men for an alleged catalogue of physical and sexual abuse. Here's our chief reporter, David Cowan.
St Ninian's List D School was based in what is now Gartmore House in Stirlingshire. It was run by monks in the De La Salle order. Today, one former resident claimed their regime had been brutal. 3 men have been accused of physically and sexually abusing boys at St Ninian's in the 1960s and 70s. Then known as Brother Benedict, Michael Murphy is 69 and lives in Hampshire. He faces 14 charges alleging physical and sexual abuse. Charles McKenna is now 83 years old and is from Stirling. He's denied 8 charges, including indecency and assault. The third accused is James McKinstry, who's 70 and lives in Portsmouth Monteith, Stirlingshire. He faces 5 charges of indecency and sexual assault. Today, the High Court heard evidence from a series of men, now in their 40s and 50s, but young boys at the time.
An unemployed labourer told the court that when he was 12 years old, he was assaulted by Brother Benedict in the school dining hall. He said he was then dragged by the back of the neck to another room, where the monk produced a brown box that had wires and steel battens. He said the monk told him to hold on to the steel battens and turned a switch. He then received an electric shock and fell to the floor.
The labourer said Brother Benedict also whipped him with shoelaces tied together to form a cat o' nine tails. His brother told the court the monk had forced him to eat his own vomit. Defence lawyers accused the men of making up or exaggerating their claims. One admitted that he's launched a compensation claim for £50,000. The trial is expected to last for up to 4 weeks.
A driver from the bus company involved in a fatal accident in France last year has admitted not taking his proper rest breaks. An inquiry has heard a number of allegations against Allen's coaches of Gore Bridge. If the claims are proven, the company could be fined or lose its licence. Mike Edwards reports.
Alan's driver, Andrew Thompson, on the right of the picture, told an inquiry in Edinburgh how he worked 25 days consecutively with only a 26-hour rest period before his next duty. The traffic examiners who are looking into the practices of the Gorebridge firm run by William Allen and his son David say Mr Thompson was a danger to himself, his passengers and other road users. The examiners say it was the worst example of an abuse of time regulations they'd ever seen. Another Allen's driver, Ian Poole, said David Allen would hand out the jobs at the beginning of each day, knowing full well they could not be carried out legally. Agent for the traffic examiner, Mark Lindsay, said it was the driver's job to do the work, whether it was legal or not. I can't comment on that, said Mr Poole. An Allen's bus crashed near Dijon last year, killing Largs Academy schoolgirl Catherine Fish and injuring several others. The French authorities are still looking into the accident. Traffic examiners allege more than 300 breaches of the rules governing drivers' hours and working practices. The allegations centre around 21 drivers who are accused of falsifying tachograph records and unaccounted journeys and rest breaks. The inquiry is before the Scottish Traffic Commissioner Joan Aitken, who has powers to revoke a company's licence, suspend the licence for a period of weeks or months, or restrict the number of vehicles it can operate. The inquiry continues.
Mike Edwards. Sexual health infections in Scotland are now more common than the flu. Today saw the launch of a new TV ad aimed at cutting the number of young people having unprotected sex. Experts are warning the country is now in danger of suffering a chlamydia epidemic. Cases have doubled in just 3 years, while HIV and gonorrhea are also on the rise. That's it for now. More Scottish news from 5:25 tomorrow morning. For now, it's back to Trevor MacDonald and the ITV News. For me, good night.
Hello again. In a moment, those leaks from Hillary Clinton's memoirs, but first, tonight's headlines. ITV News has found evidence inside one of Saddam Hussein's bunkers of the lengths he went to protect himself and his family. Tony Blair's been fending off more attacks in the Commons about whether he duped Parliament and the public over Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. President Bush has persuaded Israeli and Palestinian leaders to take the first steps on the roadmap to peace. And finally, what was it like when Bill Clinton told his wife Hillary about his affair with Monica Lewinsky? Well, unauthorized leaks from her new book give a pretty clear idea. She says she felt like wringing his neck. From the United States, John Ray reports.
Unforgettable and unforgiven, the First Lady and his shameful secret.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Back then, she chose to believe him. These days, he's out, she's on the up. Senator Clinton with an eye on the White House herself. Time to wash her hands of Lewinsky and tell of Bill's tearful confession. She remembers, I could hardly breathe. Gulping for air, I started crying and yelling at him. What do you mean? What are you saying? Why did you lie to me? He just stood there saying over and over again, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Their marriage close to the rocks, only Buddy the dog was happy to keep Bill company, says Hillary. I was dumbfounded, heartbroken and outraged that I'd believed him at all. As a wife, I wanted to wring Bill's neck.
Is this the unofficial beginning of a presidential campaign?
No, this is a story about an extraordinary time in my life and the life of our country. I touch on the good times, the not so good times, and try to explain what that experience was like for me.
Sticking with Bill was the toughest decision of her life, says Hillary. The public response to this book will help decide a tougher decision still, whether she'll run for the White House herself. John Ray, ITV News, Washington.
That's it tonight. You can follow all the day's developments on the ITV News channel. We're back tomorrow. From all of us here, good night.
ITV National Weather, sponsored by PowerGen. PowerGen, power in good hands.
Hello, good evening. Looks like a fine day for most of Britain tomorrow. There'll be some more rain coming into the west later on, but for much of daylight hours, I think many of us can enjoy some sunshine tomorrow. Now, the last of today's rain is gradually moving away to the north and east. It'll clear away in the early hours. The rest of the night will then be dry, temperatures down to around 8 or 9. And tomorrow starts off fine and dry pretty much everywhere, lots of sunshine around to start the day. Now central and eastern parts of Britain will stay fine and dry right through the day, but in the west you'll see 1 or 2 scattered showers turning up around the middle of the day, and then later on some more general cloud and rain into the northwest. But it should be quite late in the day before the rain gets there, so for most of the day fine and dry, temperatures generally high teens or low 20s, the highest temperature in the southeast around 21. Good night.
PowerGen. Power in good hands.
The body of a man matching your husband's description has been found.
Are you telling me my husband's dead? An investigation too close for comfort. It's not me you want, it's your lot.
Police officer has been murdered.
How long have you known he was dead?
We had our own investigation to consider.
Is it to be treated like any other case? I find anyone dragging their heels, get out.
Loyalty to a colleague, yeah, we all understand that.
MIT, Saturday, 9:05. Well, tonight's late film at 11:20 stars David Essex in A Rock and Roll Dream. That'll be the day. But first, there's a grim discovery for Friday and Smith in Dragnet.